She walked into my kitchen every Tuesday morning for 6 years, kissed my cheek, and called me her second mother. She cried at my husband's funeral. She held my hand at the graveside. And the whole time, every single Tuesday, every single kiss, every single tear, she was sleeping with him. Or at least, that's what I thought. The truth turned out to be so much stranger. And as it turned out, it was so much worse.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. I want you to picture the kind of morning that makes you feel like everything in your life has settled into the right shape. October light coming through old windows, a pot of coffee on the stove, the smell of cinnamon toast because I still make it the way my mother did, with real butter and a shake of sugar right out of the oven. That was most Tuesday mornings in my house. My name is Miriam. I'm 68 years old and I live in a 2-story colonial on the north end of Hadley Falls, a small town about 40 minutes outside Burlington that smells like pine resin and wood smoke from September through May. My husband Raymond passed 5 years ago. Heart attack, sudden, a Tuesday actually. Isn't that something? Since then, my son Trevor has been my anchor. He's steady, loyal, the kind of man who calls when he says he will and shows up when it matters. He married Iris about 12 years ago, and she was, I want to be honest here, she was everything I could have hoped for in a daughter-in-law. Organized, warm, attentive. She remembered birthdays. She sent thank you notes by hand. She had this beautiful dark auburn hair she always wore pinned up, and she moved through the world like she'd been trained to make a good impression. Every Tuesday morning for 6 years, she came to my house for breakfast. It started right after Raymond died. She showed up one Tuesday with a coffee cake from the bakery on Elm, and she said, "I thought you might not want to be alone today." And I thought, here is a good woman, a genuinely good woman. I said, "Come any Tuesday you want." She took me up on it and never stopped. We'd sit at the kitchen table for an hour, sometimes 2. She'd update me on Trevor's work, on their son Elliot's school projects, on whatever small dramas were circling through town. I'd tell her about my garden, about the book I was reading, about the neighbor's dog that kept getting into my flower bed. It was easy. It was comfortable. It was the kind of friendship that doesn't require performance, or so I believed. 5 years of Tuesday mornings. 5 years of coffee and cinnamon toast and easy conversation. 5 years of thinking I knew exactly who Iris was. I was 63 years old when Raymond died, and 68 when everything unraveled. People talk about wisdom like it comes automatically with age. Like by the time you've been around long enough, you can see people clearly. I thought I could. I thought I'd earned that. Lord, was I wrong. It was a Tuesday in mid-October, the kind of morning where the trees are going red and gold and the air smells like cold coming in fast. Iris had been there since 8. She'd had her coffee, eaten half a piece of toast, told me about the landscaping project she was managing for a house on the Collins Road. Big job, apparently. Stone path, new hedgerows, the whole thing. She was proud of it. At 9:15, she pushed back her chair, grabbed her bag, kissed my cheek. "I need to run to the hardware store before they get busy," she said. "Do you need anything while I'm out?" I shook my head. She was out the door in 30 seconds, heels clicking on the porch, car starting up, gravel crunching as she pulled out. I started clearing the table. About 15 minutes later, I heard it. A buzz from the entryway table, then silence, then a longer buzz. I figured she'd forgotten her phone. She sometimes left it there when she came in, set it down while she took off her coat. I wasn't going to touch it. That's not who I am. I don't pry, I don't snoop. I raised my son to respect privacy, and I apply the same standard to myself. But it buzzed again. Longer this time, I thought, what if it's Trevor? What if it's Elliot's school? What if there's something she needs to know right now? I walked to the entryway. The screen was lit up, and I stopped moving. The contact photo was Raymond's face. Not an old photo. Not the wedding photo we had in frames around the house. This was Raymond the way he looked in his late 50s. Still handsome, a little heavier, silver at his temples, smiling directly at the camera. The kind of photo you take of someone you want to keep looking at. The contact name said simply R, and beneath it, the preview of a text message. Thursday. Same spot. Can't wait. I stood there for what felt like a very long time. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a crow called once and went quiet. My husband had been dead for 5 years, and his face was on my daughter-in-law's phone. My hands were shaking. I want to be honest about that. I am not a woman who falls apart easily. I've buried a husband, managed an estate, raised a son mostly on my own during the lean years when Raymond was working 2 jobs and barely home. I'm not delicate, but I was shaking. I sat down on the entryway bench and held the phone and tried to think clearly. It could be a mistake. Maybe someone had the same name, Raymond, and used his photo as a joke. Maybe it was spam. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that I simply could not see yet. But Thursday, same spot. I knew Iris's PIN. I'd seen her type it 100 times. Their son, Elliot's birthday. Month and day, 4 digits. She used it for everything. I told myself I shouldn't. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself I was a 68-year-old woman sitting in her own entryway about to do something she could not undo. Then I typed in the PIN. The phone opened. The messaging app was already on screen. The thread with R went back. I started scrolling and couldn't stop. Months and months of messages, at least a year that I could see. Maybe more. Thanks for yesterday. That first line hit me like cold water. You were incredible. I kept scrolling. I miss your arms. I haven't felt like this in years. Thomas is getting more suspicious. We need to slow down. And then one that made my stomach drop completely. The old girl hasn't got a clue. She never was that sharp. The old girl. They were talking about me. I kept scrolling, deeper back. The messages became warmer, more careful. The way people write when they're still figuring out whether to say what they actually mean. There were dozens of photographs embedded in the thread. Iris and a man. Outdoors, mostly. Trees, a dock, a cabin porch with Adirondack chairs. Holding hands, laughing at something off camera. Leaning into each other the way people do when they've stopped thinking about how they look. I studied the man in those photos. He was not Raymond. He looked like Raymond. The jaw, the posture, the way he stood with his weight slightly forward. But the man in these photos was alive and recent, and he was not my dead husband. The earliest messages I could find were dated about 8 months before Raymond died, 8 months before the heart attack that I stood next to his hospital bed for, 8 months before the funeral where Iris wept on my shoulder. Something cold settled into my chest, not rage, not tears, something quieter and harder than either one. I heard a car on the gravel. I put the phone back on the table, walked to the kitchen, picked up my dish towel, folded it. The front door opened. Mary? I think I left my phone, Iris called from the entryway. I'd been calling me Mary since the first year. I never corrected her. On the table right where you left your bag, I answered. My voice came out perfectly steady. That surprised me. Her heels on the hardwood. The small sound of the phone being picked up. Oh, thank goodness. A little laugh. I'd be lost without this thing today. Drive safe, sweetheart. The door closed. I stood at the kitchen counter with my folded dish towel and waited until I heard her car leave. Then I sat down at the table and put my head in my hands. My husband had been having an affair, or something very close to one, with my daughter-in-law. And now, 5 years after his death, someone who looked almost exactly like him was continuing it. I needed to know who that man was, and I needed to know before Thursday. That evening, Trevor called. Hey, Mom, you okay? You sound tired. I didn't sleep great, I said, which was true. I hadn't slept at all. You know, October always gets to me a little. With the anniversary coming up? I know. His voice softened. The anniversary of Raymond's death was in 2 weeks. Trevor always got quieter around this time of year. You want me to come by this weekend? We could rake the yard, get those leaves up before the frost." "That would be nice," I said. "Iris says hi, by the way. She's buried in that Collins job, working late most nights this week." I pressed my fingernail into my palm, hard enough to feel it. "Tell her not to work too hard," I said. After I hung up, I sat for a long time in Raymond's old armchair by the front window, the one he used to fall asleep in after dinner. I used to complain about it, said it made him look like an old man before his time. He'd just laugh and close his eyes. I thought about the photos on Iris's phone, the messages going back 8 months before he died, all those Thursday evenings Raymond had spent at his bowling league. That was the lie I remembered. Every Thursday. "Doctor says I need to move more, Miriam. The guys from the office have been asking me to join for months." He'd come home smelling like cold air, and he'd eat a little leftover dinner and go to bed early. No bowling, just Iris, just that cabin by the lake. Except the man in those photos wasn't Raymond. That was the thing I kept circling back to, because I'd looked at those photos carefully before Iris came back for her phone. The man in them was close to Raymond's age, maybe a few years younger. Same build, same jaw, same coloring, but his nose was slightly different. His hands were different. And Raymond had a scar on his left forearm from a table saw accident in the garage 20 years ago. The man in the photos, both arms visible in at least one shot, had no such scar. So who was he? And what, exactly, had Raymond been to this woman who brought me coffee cake the morning after my husband's funeral? I got up, rinsed my coffee cup, and went down to the basement. Raymond's office in the basement looked exactly the way he'd left it. That was partly my choice and partly just inertia. The room smelled like cedar from the old paneling and something dusty and papery, old files, old folders, old life. There was a metal desk he'd bought secondhand in 1980-something, a standing lamp with a yellow shade, and 3 filing cabinet drawers that I had never once opened. Trevor came down here sometimes to find paperwork, property records, old tax files, that sort of thing. He treated the room like a library, quiet, efficient, leave everything as you found it. I went straight to the picture on the wall. It was a photograph of the lake at sunset. Raymond had taken it himself years ago, framed it, and hung it in the office, because he said it helped him think. I lifted the frame off the hook. The key was still taped to the back. I had found it there once by accident about 15 years ago, and Raymond had said it was just a spare for the filing cabinet. I'd never had reason to think about it again until right now. I unlocked the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Folders, bank statements going back a decade, a manila envelope with old car insurance records, a folder labeled House Insurance. Nothing unusual. And then, at the very back of the drawer, pushed against the side wall and half hidden beneath a stack of old mortgage papers, a small wooden box, about the size of a shoe box, maybe a little smaller, the kind of thing you'd buy at a craft fair for $15, plain pine, no lock. I sat down on the floor, I know, not dignified, but my knees don't love standing for long, and opened the box. Photographs, not family photos, not the kind you'd put in an album or frame for the mantel. A man and a woman at a lakeside cabin, hands intertwined, laughing, sitting on the same Adirondack chairs I'd seen in the photos on Iris's phone, though the woman in these pictures was different. Younger than Iris, dark-haired, with a wide smile and an easy way of leaning into the man beside her. The man was not Raymond either. He looked like Raymond. The same jaw, the same posture, the same way of tilting his head when he was listening to someone. But he was younger in these photos, late 40s maybe. Hair still dark. I turned each photo over. Raymond's handwriting on the backs. Dates, all of them from 4 and 5 years before his death. At the bottom of the box was an envelope. Inside, a property deed. A cabin at Crescent Lake, 42 minutes north of Hadley Falls. Raymond had told me years ago that he'd sold that property, said the upkeep was more trouble than it was worth, and he'd found a buyer. He hadn't sold it. His name was still on the deed. I kept one photograph. the clearest one, where the man's face was turned toward the camera, and replaced everything else. Locked the drawer, hung the picture back on the wall. Then I sat at Raymond's old desk and looked at the photo in my hand. I did not know who these people were, but I was going to find out. I slept maybe 3 hours that night. By 6 in the morning, I was back at the kitchen table with Raymond's property deed and a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee that had gone cold before I'd had more than 2 sips. Crescent Lake. I knew the name. It was a small private lake up in the hill country north of town, the kind of place where people had fishing camps and summer places that had been in families for generations. Raymond had bought the cabin early in our marriage, before Trevor was born. He said it was an investment. He said it would be good for family trips. We went up there exactly 3 times. After that, Raymond always had a reason why it wasn't a good weekend. Too much work, the weather, the drive. I stopped asking. I assumed he'd eventually sell it, and then he told me he had. He had not. He had kept it as a secret place for 20-something years. I wrote down the cabin's address from the deed. Then I wrote down what I knew. The man in Raymond's photos was not Raymond. He shared some physical traits, enough to be noticeable. But he was a different person. He appeared in photos in Raymond's possession, taken years before Raymond died. He was also apparently still alive and still meeting Iris at the same cabin, using Raymond's name as his contact in her phone. I circled that last part twice. Who keeps a dead man's name in their phone? Unless the contact was never Raymond to begin with. Unless the name in Iris's phone had always been someone else. And Raymond had just happened to look similar enough that I'd misread the situation entirely. Or unless... And this thought made me feel cold all over again. Raymond and this other man had been connected in some way, known each other, maybe even coordinated. I needed to go to that cabin. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I left the house at 10:30 on a Wednesday morning, which I told myself was perfectly reasonable. I was a 68-year-old woman taking a drive in the country. Nobody could object to that. I wore my good wool coat and I put on lipstick, because I always feel more composed with lipstick on. Small things. The drive north took me through the kind of landscape that reminds you why people stay in Vermont. Rolling hills, pine stands so thick they look blue-black in the October light, low gray sky pressing down like a wool blanket. I had the heat on and the radio off, and I kept my hand steady on the wheel. The address from the deed led me up a gravel road off Route 12. The trees closed in on either side. I came around a long curve, and there it was. A cabin. Brown-stained cedar siding, a screened porch along the front, a dock visible through the trees that ran down to the water. Modest, well-kept, the kind of place that's been maintained by someone who uses it regularly. A wood pile stacked neatly along the side wall, window boxes with the last of the mums still holding on, and a car in the driveway. A dark blue Subaru wagon, newer model, main plates, smoke from the chimney. Someone was home. I drove past slowly and pulled over at a wide spot in the road about 100 yards down, under a spruce tree where I wouldn't be visible from the cabin. I turned off the engine. I sat there for 40 minutes, long enough for my coffee thermos to lose its warmth, long enough for a chickadee to investigate the hood of my car and leave disappointed. Then the cabin door opened. A man stepped onto the porch. He stood there for a moment, stretching maybe, or just looking out at the lake. He wore a dark green flannel shirt and jeans. He was tall, with gray at his temples and a square jaw and the same way of carrying his weight forward that I'd always associated with Raymond. He looked enough like Raymond to make my breath catch in my chest. He was not Raymond. He turned toward the tree line, looked out at the water for another moment, then walked to the car, got in, started it up, backed down the driveway and turned north, away from me, and drove off. I couldn't see the plates clearly enough. A main prefix and a number I half caught and immediately lost. I sat under that spruce tree for another 10 minutes. Then I turned around and drove home. I didn't know his name. I didn't know who he was. but I knew what he looked like, and I knew he was using that cabin like it was his own. I had a starting point. Here is where I made my first real mistake. When I'd driven past the cabin, I'd noticed something small, barely worth mentioning, except that it cost me 2 weeks and $400. There was a hand towel hanging from a hook beside the screened porch door, old and faded, but you could see a monogram on it, dark blue thread, the letters RH. I told myself, his last name starts with H. Raymond's last name was Hartwell. Maybe this man was a Hartwell too, a relative I didn't know about, but the RH, maybe his first name started with R as well, Richard H. Ronald H. Roger H. I called a local woman named Deborah, who does research and document work out of her home office on Birch Street. She's semi-retired, good at genealogy and county records, and she doesn't ask unnecessary questions. I explained that I was trying to locate a man, possibly connected to some old property matters, first initial R, last initial H, likely from the Burlington area or further north, possibly with ties to the Crescent Lake area. She said she'd look into it. Her fee was $200 up front and $200 on delivery. 10 days later, she called me. She'd found a Richard Holt, 50s, fit, gray-haired fishing guide and hunting camp operator out of Stowe. He'd rented cabins in the Crescent Lake area several times over the years through a recreational property co-op. She had his business address. I drove to Stowe on a Thursday. I found Richard Holt at his tackle shop, a friendly and entirely innocent man who looked nothing like Raymond and had never heard of Iris or any Hartwell property. He was gracious about my confusion. He offered me a cup of coffee and said sometimes people mix up cabin records all the time up here. Don't worry about it. I drove home with $200 gone and not a single answer. The monogram had meant nothing, or it had meant something to Raymond. Maybe the cabin came with the towel. Maybe it was a guest set from years ago. I had no idea. And I'd wasted nearly 2 weeks chasing a stranger. I sat in my driveway for a long while that evening. It was getting dark early now. The first hard frost had come through and the leaves were mostly down. I needed to stop guessing. I needed someone who actually knew Raymond, the parts of Raymond that I clearly had not known. I thought about Nell. The following Saturday, Trevor came by to rake leaves. We worked side by side for about 2 hours. He on the big section of lawn near the road, me on the smaller patch by the side garden. We made 2 large piles and filled 6 lawn bags, and he stacked the bags by the curb. Then we came inside, and I made sandwiches, and he sat at the kitchen table the way he's sat at that table his whole life, loose and comfortable, with his jacket still half on. So, Iris mentioned she's been seeing someone, he said. He said it casually, like it was one item in a list of updates. I kept my hands on the sandwich knife. Is that so? Yeah, since, I don't know, spring maybe? Mutual friend introduction, she said. He picked up his sandwich. She hasn't made a big deal of it, which I appreciate. We've been pretty good about keeping things low-key since the divorce, you know? Not dragging Elliot into drama. That's very mature, I said. His name is Roland, apparently. She says he's a good guy. Older. Roland. R. I put the sandwich knife down carefully. What do you know about him? I asked. I kept my voice the same easy pitch. Trevor shrugged. Not much. She said he's from up north somewhere. Maine, maybe. She seems genuinely happy. Elliot seems to like him, which is the part I care about. He took a bite. I figure as long as she's not bringing drama to the doorstep, it's not my business. No, I suppose not, I said. I sat down across from him and we ate our sandwiches and talked about Elliot's upcoming school project and whether the gutters on the north side of the house needed replacing and whether there was any point in planting bulbs this late in October. The whole time, the name was sitting in my chest like a stone. Roland. Main plates on a dark blue Subaru. I had a first name now, I had a direction, and I had no more time to waste chasing strangers in tackle shops. Raymond's younger sister, Nell, had not been at his funeral. We didn't talk about that much. The estrangement had come on gradually over the last decade of Raymond's life, something to do with the distribution of their mother's small estate, a dispute over jewelry and a savings account that had never quite resolved itself. By the time Raymond died, they hadn't spoken in 4 years. She wasn't on the notification list. By the time I thought to call her, the service was over. After that, I'd sent her a card. She'd sent back a note on plain paper that said she was sorry for my loss and hoped I was well. That was the last I'd heard from her. I found her address through the county assessor's website. She still lived in the same small house in Whitfield she'd bought years ago, a 20-minute drive east of Hadley Falls. I didn't call first. On a Thursday morning in early November, I baked an apple crumb pie, a real one, from scratch, the kind that takes most of a morning, and drove to Whitfield. Nell came to the door in gardening clothes, even in November. She was 71, wiry, with Raymond's same gray-blue eyes and a sharpness to her face that I'd always found slightly intimidating. She looked at me for a long moment. "Miriam," she said, "I brought a pie." I said, "I need to talk to you about something, and I'd rather do it over coffee than standing on your porch." She looked at me for another moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Fine," she said. "Come in." Nell's house was small and very clean, with books stacked on every flat surface and a cat asleep on the radiator, and the kind of careful order that comes from living alone for a long time. She made coffee while I set the pie on the counter. Neither of us made small talk. That had never been Nell's style. We sat at her kitchen table. She wrapped both hands around her mug, looked at me. "What do you need to know?" she said. I said, "Did Raymond have a brother?" Nell went very still. Then she set down her mug. "He told you," she said. "He didn't tell me anything," I said. "I found out on my own, recently. There's a man using Raymond's name in someone's phone. He looks enough like Raymond to stop your heart. I've seen him. His name is Roland. He drives a car with Maine plates, and I think he's been staying at the cabin on Crescent Lake." Nell was quiet for a long time. The cat on the radiator shifted and resettled. "Their father had another family," she said finally, "up in Aroostook County. A woman he'd been seeing since before he married our mother. They had a son, Roland, about 4 years younger than Raymond." She paused. "Our father acknowledged it eventually. Raymond found out in his late 20s, went up there, met Roland. They stayed in loose contact after that. I only knew because I found letters." Letters from Roland? Letters from Raymond to Roland. I found them in a box when we were settling our mother's things. Her voice was flat, careful. "Raymond asked me not to tell anyone. I agreed. And then we had the falling out over the estate, and I was so angry I could barely think straight. And by the time Raymond died, I still hadn't said anything to anyone, including you." She met my eyes. "I'm sorry for that, Miriam. I should have told you years ago." I thought about that for a moment. "Do you have a way to reach Roland?" I asked. "I have a number. I don't know if it still works. I found it in Raymond's address book when I was helping sort the estate, before you and I stopped speaking." She got up, went to a drawer by the telephone, came back with a small index card, a Burlington area code, a number written in Nell's careful handwriting. I took the card. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. I wanted to understand it. Nell looked at me steadily. "Because Raymond got away with everything his entire life," she said. "He was charming and careless, and the consequences always seemed to land on someone else. I loved my brother, but I am very tired of his messes outlasting him." She picked up her fork and cut into the pie. "Now eat something," she said. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." She wasn't wrong. I stayed at Nell's for another hour and a half. Somewhere in that second cup of coffee, I took the photograph from my coat pocket, the one I'd kept from Raymond's wooden box. The man with dark hair taken years ago at the Crescent Lake cabin, the woman beside him, dark-haired and smiling, leaning into him with easy warmth. I slid it across the table. Nell picked it up. Her expression changed. Something went out of it. the careful neutrality she'd been maintaining. "That's Dina," she said. "You knew her?" "I met her once at a family thing. This was maybe 7, 8 years ago. Roland brought her." Nell set the photo down. "She died. Cancer. About 3 years ago, I heard through an old connection." I let that settle. So Roland was a widower. His wife Dina had died 3 years ago, and Iris, who had apparently been in contact with this man since before Raymond died, was now, what, his new relationship? I picked up the photo again. Raymond had taken this. He'd had it in his possession for years. He'd stored it in a locked box in his private drawer. A photo of his half-brother and his half-brother's wife, or I looked at the dates on the back again. The photographs were taken 4 and 5 years before Raymond died, before his heart attack, before the funeral, before all those Tuesday mornings with Iris. "Nell," I said slowly, "when Raymond met Roland in their late 20s, when they first made contact, did Roland ever come here? To Hadley Falls?" Nell thought about it. "I believe so. Once or twice when they were first getting to know each other." She frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because I'm starting to think the affair with my daughter-in-law started with Raymond," I said, "and ended with Roland." Nell looked at me for a long moment. "Lot of betrayal in one family," she said. "Yes," I said, "there is." When I got home from Nell's, I sat down at my desktop computer and used the old number from Nell's index card to search the internet. It was the kind of searching that takes patience. You put in a phone number, cross-reference it with public records, look for social profiles, work your way outward from one piece of information to the next. I am not a tech person, I'll be honest about that. But I know how to search and I know how to be methodical. My neighbor's grandson had shown me how to do reverse number lookups and how to find public social profiles, and I'd taken notes. After about 2 hours, I found Roland. He was on a community nature photography platform, the kind of thing where people post pictures of birds and sunsets and fall foliage. His profile was under a slightly different version of his name, not Roland Hartwell, but R. Hartwell Photography. But the profile photo matched the man from the cabin. Older now, grayer, but unmistakably the same jaw and posture. His posts were infrequent. Landscapes, mostly. Birds on a dock. But there was one photograph from October of the previous year that made my breath come short. Iris laughing at what looked like a harvest fair. Pumpkins stacked behind her, a paper cup of cider in her hand. Her hair down and loose. She looked young and entirely at ease. Tagged location: Gilmore's Farm Stand, North Winslow. I wasn't in his followers. He had privacy settings that blocked his full post history, but I could see the ones that were publicly shared, and I screenshotted everything. His profile photo, the photo of Iris, 2 other posts that showed the same cabin deck I recognized from Raymond's photographs. I saved them to a thumb drive, the small yellow one I keep in my desk drawer for backing up documents. I was pleased with myself. I had a name, a face, photographs, a connection confirmed. I was, for the first time in weeks, feeling like I'd gotten solid ground under my feet. That evening, Patty from next door called and asked if I could do her a favor. Her washing machine was out, and she had a load she needed to get done before morning. Her husband had a work trip, and she needed to pack his things. Could she run a load at my house? Of course, I said. Come on over. Patty brought 3 loads, actually, and we sat in the laundry room and talked about her daughter's new apartment in Portland while the machines ran. After she left, I was tired. I stripped off my wool coat, the coat I'd been wearing all day, the one with my yellow thumb drive still in the left pocket, and hung it on the hook by the back door. I didn't notice that Patty had grabbed it along with the last load. I found out the next morning. She texted me, "I'm so sorry, Miriam. Your coat went through with the last load. I hung it up to dry. I think there was something in the pocket. It looks like a small USB thing. I'm afraid it might be ruined." The thumb drive came out of the washing machine completely dead. Everything gone. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee and an empty thumb drive, and I said several words I typically save for private occasions. Then I thought about what to do next. I needed a new strategy. The problem with digital evidence is that it requires access you don't always have. Roland's profile was partly private. I couldn't get back to those screenshots. I could describe what I'd seen, but descriptions aren't proof. And even if I'd had the screenshots, what exactly was I planning to do with them? Walk up to Trevor and say, "Your ex-wife is dating your father's half-brother you never knew existed." That would blow the family apart. Trevor would be devastated not just by Iris, but by Raymond. Elliot would lose what remained of a clean memory of his grandfather. And for what? So I could say I'd exposed everyone? I sat with that for a long time. I thought about what I actually wanted, not drama, not exposure. Not to watch my son grieve something he couldn't fix. What I wanted was for the lie to have a cost, for someone to be held accountable for something. And the most concrete, real, actionable piece of this entire situation was that cabin at Crescent Lake. It was in Raymond's name. It was part of his estate. It had never been disclosed as an asset in the estate process because Raymond told me he'd sold it years before he died. If it still existed under his name, which it did, the deed was right there in my basement. Then it was marital property. Property I had legal standing to pursue, and Roland Hartwell had been using it. I made a call to Ellen Marsh, an estate and property attorney I'd used twice before. Once when Raymond died, and once when I needed to update my own will. I explained the situation carefully, that I had recently discovered a property that should have been included in my late husband's estate, which had not been, that a third party appeared to be using the property, that I wanted to understand my options. Ellen said she'd like to see the deed and would need about a week to review the estate records. Then I called Trevor. "How are things going with Iris?" I asked. Casual. He said fine, said she seemed in good spirits, said she'd mentioned wanting to bring Roland to Elliot's birthday dinner next month. She thought it was time for a proper family introduction, since things were getting serious. I said that sounded lovely. Said Iris deserved to be happy. Said I looked forward to meeting him. Trevor was genuinely touched. He said he was glad I was being so gracious about the whole thing. "Of course," I said. "This family has been through enough. We should be welcoming." After I hung up, I set the kettle on, watched it heat, waited for it to boil. I had 1 month. The invitation was extended. Roland was coming to me. The next 4 weeks were quiet ones. Ellen came back to me after 10 days. The cabin at Crescent Lake had not been included in the estate inventory filed at Raymond's death. It should have been. It was titled solely in Raymond's name and had no separate trust or designation. In straightforward terms, I had a legitimate claim to it as surviving spouse. She said it would be relatively simple to file for a corrected inventory and petition the property into the estate, at which point I would have full authority over it as the estate administrator. The complication, she said, was whether anyone else was making claim to the property. I told her there might be someone who had been using the cabin informally without any legal basis. She said that was actually quite common with inherited or unclaimed property, and that as long as the title was clear, usage by a third party didn't create legal ownership. I asked her to begin the filing. She sent me the paperwork that week. I signed what needed signing and sent it back. Then I took the one photograph from Raymond's wooden box, the clearest one of Roland and Dana at the cabin, and placed it in a small white envelope. I wrote nothing on the envelope. I put it in the inside pocket of my good gray coat, the one I wear for dinners and family occasions. I wasn't planning to cause a scene at Elliot's birthday party, but I wanted Roland to know, very clearly in a private moment, that I knew who he was. That the thing he'd been doing quietly, under the cover of Raymond's ghost, was no longer invisible. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes when you've been lied to enough times and finally stop being shocked by it. You stop wasting energy on outrage. You start thinking practically. What do I actually need? What can I actually change? What will protect the people I love? I had my answer on all three. I needed Roland to know I knew. I needed the cabin. I needed Trevor and Elliot to be insulated from the worst of it. I ironed my good gray coat on the Sunday before the birthday dinner, checked that the envelope was still in the inside pocket. Then I made sure the guest room was ready, confirmed the cake order, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. Elliot turned 14 on a Saturday in mid-November. He'd asked for a small dinner, just family, close friends, nothing elaborate, which in practice meant me, Trevor, Trevor's girlfriend, Sophia, Iris, Roland, and two of Elliot's school friends who came for cake and left early to go to a movie. The house smelled like pot roast and garlic bread and the particular warm chaos of a table being set for 8. I had rehearsed my face all week. They arrived at 5:30. Iris first, stepping out of the passenger side in a rust-colored wrap dress, hair down, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. And then Roland. He was taller than I'd expected. The photographs hadn't quite conveyed the height. He wore a dark blue button-down and dark jeans. Very simple, the way Raymond used to dress on weekends. The gray at his temples was more pronounced than in the online photos. His jaw was the same. The way he stood, weight slightly forward, hands loosely at his sides, the same. Elliot came bounding off the porch to hug his mother and then turned to Roland with the easy warmth of a kid who's already decided he approves. They shook hands. Elliot said something about the drive up and Roland said something back that made Elliot laugh. Trevor came out behind Sophia, cordial handshakes, polite smiles. I watched Trevor's face carefully. He looked at Roland with the mild curiosity you'd extend to any stranger, nothing more. And then it was my turn. "Miriam," Iris said, and there was just the faintest formality in her voice, a slight tightening at the jaw. "This is Roland Hartwell. Roland, this is Trevor's mother." Roland turned to me. He extended his hand. His face was calm, composed. The face of a man who has thought through this moment and decided how to play it. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hartwell," he said. "Iris and Elliot speak of you often." I shook his hand. Firm, brief, cold. "Welcome to our home," I said. His eyes met mine. Gray blue. Raymond's eyes. Almost exactly. For one fraction of a second, something moved across his face. Not guilt, not fear, something more complicated than that. Recognition, maybe. The awareness that this woman looking at him was not entirely what she appeared to be. I held his gaze for exactly long enough to make the point. Then I turned and led everyone inside. The dinner was pleasant on the surface. Elliot opened his gifts and was genuinely delighted by the noise-canceling headphones from Iris and Roland and the new basketball from Trevor. Sophia was warm and easy and kept the conversation moving through the rougher moments. I refilled glasses and brought out the bread basket and smiled at all the right intervals. Roland was quiet but engaged. He asked Elliot about his school, remembered what sport he played from what Iris had told him, asked the right follow-up questions. He was careful with Trevor, deferential without being servile. He thanked me for the pot roast 3 separate times. He was, by every observable measure, behaving well. I watched him all evening. After dinner, while Sophia and Iris were helping Elliot set up his new headphones and Trevor was on the phone with his brother-in-law, I carried a stack of dishes to the kitchen. Roland followed with the serving platter. We were alone. The kitchen was quiet, except for the scrape of dishes and the low sound of voices from the living room. Roland set the platter down by the sink. He turned on the water, started rinsing. I set down my stack of plates and turned to face him. "I know who you are," I said. I said it quietly. No drama. The way you'd state a simple fact. Roland went still. His hands on the rim of the serving platter, water running over them. He didn't say anything for a moment. "I found the photographs Raymond kept," I said. "I found the deed. I drove to the cabin in October and I watched you leave. I know about Dina. I know Raymond was your half-brother. I know this started before he died." The water was still running. Roland reached forward and turned it off. He was quiet for a long time. "How long have you known?" he said. "Since October," I said. "The phone. Iris left her phone here one Tuesday morning." Something moved across his face. Maybe the comprehension of how many small things had added up quietly over weeks. "I'm not going to cause a scene tonight," I said. "Trevor doesn't know. Elliot doesn't know. I have thought very carefully about what this information does if I release it into this family, and I've decided the cost is too high. So this stays where it is." I paused. "But I want you to understand something clearly. The cabin at Crescent Lake is part of Raymond's estate. I've already begun the legal process to correct the inventory. My attorney has filed the paperwork. When it comes through, that property comes back to me. No argument, no delay." Roland looked at me. "You're right," he said quietly, without fighting it. "I don't have any claim to it. Raymond gave me access years ago, but he gave it verbally. There's no legal documentation. I know that." He paused. "I'll cooperate with your attorney." "I know you will," I said. We stood there for a moment. The sound of Elliot's laughter from the living room drifted in. "I'm not a good person," Roland said, not performing it, just saying it flatly like it was a thing he'd already decided. "What Iris and I did, the timing of it, I can't make that look right. I know that." "No," I said, "you can't. But I want you to know that I'm not running a game on her. I know how it looks, but He stopped, started again. "I treated Dina well until she died. I'm trying to do the same for Iris. I know that's not enough, but it's true." I thought about what Nell had said. He was going to leave. He didn't appreciate what he had. "Raymond was going to leave me," I said. It wasn't a question. Roland looked at the floor. "That's what he told me, in those last months, that he was going to tell you, that it had gone on long enough." He paused. "He never did, though. And then he died." I let that sit. "Go back in there," I said. "Elliot wants to show everyone his new headphones." Roland nodded. He picked up a dish towel, dried his hands carefully, laid it back on the counter. He walked back to the living room. I stood at the kitchen sink for a moment, turned the water back on, rinsed the serving platter, watched the water run. Then I dried my hands, straightened my shoulders, and went to watch my grandson figure out the noise-canceling feature. By 8:30, Elliot's school friends had been picked up by their parents. The cake had been largely demolished, and the adults were sitting in the living room with the last of the wine and the comfortable looseness that comes after a good meal. Iris and Sophia were talking about a renovation project. Elliot was on the floor with his headphones and his phone. Roland was sitting quietly beside Iris, one arm along the back of the sofa, not touching her, just easy and present. Trevor leaned over to me. "He's all right," he said quietly, nodding toward Roland. "Better than I expected, honestly." "He is," I said. "There's something familiar about him, though." Trevor frowned slightly, not distressed, just the mild puzzlement of a person trying to place a face. "The way he talks, something about him." My heart didn't speed up. I'd been ready for this. "Men from up north all kind of sound the same," I said. "Your father used to say that." "Folks from Aroostook County, the ones who grew up there, they all have that same cadence." Trevor considered it. "Huh. Yeah, maybe." He took a sip of wine. "He does kind of have that manner Dad had, that—" He shook his head. "I can't put my finger on it." "Let it go," I said, and I smiled and touched his arm. "Tonight went well. Focus on that." Trevor smiled back. "Yeah, you're right." He looked over at Elliot, who was mouthing something along to whatever was in his headphones. "Kid had a good birthday." "He did," I said. Iris and Roland said their goodbyes at 9 o'clock. Iris hugged me, that same small hug with the slight formality she'd had all evening. I hugged her back. Roland shook my hand again. His grip was brief, and he held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. No words, None needed. I stood at the front door and watched their headlights sweep the driveway and disappear down the road. Trevor came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. "Good night," he said. "Good night, son," I said. It is February now, the middle of the month, and there is 2 feet of snow on the ground, and the birch trees outside my kitchen window look like white candles against a gray sky. I am sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that is, for once, still warm. The paperwork on the Crescent Lake cabin came through in late January. Ellen Marsh did excellent work, methodical, efficient, no drama. The corrected estate inventory was filed, the property was formally acknowledged as an overlooked marital asset, and Roland, true to his word in the kitchen that November evening, signed over his informal interest without protest and without a lawyer. I sold the cabin 3 weeks later. Private sale, cash offer. A family from Burlington who wanted a place to fish in the summers and ski from in the winters. They were delighted. I was fair on the price. The proceeds, after attorney fees, came to a little over $92,000. I opened a custodial account in Elliot's name, a college fund. I put the whole amount in, minus what I'll need for taxes. He'll get it at 18 to use however he sees fit. School, trade program, whatever direction his life goes. I have not told Trevor about any of it. I told him the account was funded by some investments I'd been meaning to consolidate. He thanked me, got slightly teary, said I was too generous. I told him not to make a fuss. Iris and Roland are still together. I hear about it through Trevor occasionally, nothing dramatic. They took Elliot to a ski weekend in January. They're talking about a trip somewhere warm in the spring. Elliot likes Roland. I have thought about that more than I expected to. It is a strange thing to sit with. Trevor doesn't know. He may never know. I've turned that decision over in my hands many times, looked at it from every angle I can think of, and I keep arriving at the same place. He is building a good life. He has Sophia, who is warm and real and treats him with kindness. He has Elliot, who is growing into someone fine. He has the memory of his father, which is complicated, if you know what I know, but is in most of its important parts a decent memory of a decent man who loved his son. I am not going to take that from him, not if I can help it. There are things we carry because we are strong enough to carry them, not because it's fair. Tuesday mornings have changed. Iris still comes, but less regularly now, once or twice a month instead of every week. The warmth between us is quieter, more careful on both sides, I think. She doesn't know I know, but she senses something. People usually do. Last Tuesday, she sat at my kitchen table and drank her coffee and told me about the Collins landscaping project, which is apparently almost finished. She seemed proud of it. I asked the right questions. She relaxed a little. When she left, she kissed my cheek. Same as always. I watched her car back down the driveway. Same as always. And I thought about Nell, who was carrying her own version of this story for 8 years and never told anyone. I thought about Roland, who shook my hand in the kitchen and said, "You're right," without flinching. I thought about Raymond, who was going to leave and then died. A man who made bad choices and didn't have enough time left to make better ones. I thought about what it means to choose peace. People say it like it's a passive thing, like peace is what you settle for when you can't do anything else. That is not what I've found. Choosing peace when you have other options is the most active thing I have ever done. It costs something. You pay it, and you keep paying it. And what you get in return is not softness. It's clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you are done being surprised by other people's weaknesses and have finally made peace with your own. I am 68 years old. I have buried a husband and rebuilt a life and discovered things I could not have imagined finding. And I am still at this kitchen table, still making cinnamon toast, still watching the birch trees in February. That is enough. For now, it is more than enough. If you were sitting across from me right now, I'd ask you this. What would you do with a truth that could set you free and destroy someone you love at the same time? I don't think there's one right answer. I think there are only the choices we can actually live with. I've made mine. I'm living with it. And mostly, these days, I sleep just fine. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.